Okay, here I am again, and I'm going to read part two of In Stuart Times. It was a long chapter, and I wanted to break it up for listening purposes. Just want to incorporate this so everybody can see. Um, we're discussing Elizabeth. She was the eldest of the daughter of James VI of Scotland, and he also eventually became James I of England and Scotland. So she had become the Empress or Electress of Palatine when she married Frederick, and they had a good marriage. But anyways, I want to go ahead and get started so everybody can listen to this. It's a very good discussion about a Stuart Princess Royale. So it discusses the history and the origins of Princess Royale and what they do. So this is section 4. The marriage contract stipulated that Prince Mary should be transported to the Low Countries until the age of 12. But Henry Frederick of Orange could not resist displaying his daughter-in-law in triumph to his subjects. When Prince William returned to Holland, he was followed only a year later by his bride. Escorted by a squadron of 15 ships, the Princess Mary and her mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, crossed the North Sea during the storms of March, an ill-chosen time for sailing that cost them a baggage ship which sank off Rotterdam. Not only with the coffers containing the Queen's sacramental plate, but also with the chests of all her court gowns and spare clothing of her ladies. The Queen of Bohemia rode to meet her niece and Queen Henrietta, a sister-in-law who, till then, she had never seen, and both the royal ladies undoubtedly approved the regulations for Mary's new home at The Hague. No one shall be qualified to enter the bedchamber of the princess unless qualified to do so. Above all, no men. When Her Royal Highness eats in private, she is to be served by her bedchamber women. When she goes out in her coach, there will be care that no men are to be put therein. These precautions were no more than prudent, for Mary's marriage was not solemnized under the Dutch Reformed ritual until her 12th birthday, and a revised family agreement ensured that the young husband and wife should not be domiciled together until she had reached the age of 15. While the princess placidly continued her education under her governess, Lady Stanhope, at the one end of the palace, her husband, completed a more permissive private tuition with a luscious young companion named Jenny d'Alone at the other. When Queen Henrietta Maria sailed home to England after spending nearly a year in Holland, Mary, however, began to appear at the more formal court functions in her own right, and indeed as the only princess enjoying a royal precedence, and a more difficult domestic situation developed. Her father-in-law, a snob to his fingertips, always swept off his hat in her presence, a notable gesture with the feathered broad-brimmed cavalier hats then in vogue, and then he pointedly remained bareheaded before her indoors or out. If his wife, Amalia, demurred that she herself did not receive such courtesies, surely rightfully to be enjoyed by the Princess of Orange. Frederick Henry pompously explained that the rulers of Orange enjoyed the title of Highness and not Royal Highness. Amalia could not stomach such nonsense, and perhaps Frederick Henry at first considered it tactful to conceal from his wife, or at all events soft pedal the distinction for her daughter-in-law that so obsessed his imagination. In March 1642, the Dutch envoy, Henvelet, who escorted Princess Mary from England, is careful to use the title La Princesse Royale, in correspondence with Frederick Henry, although he does not seem to have used it officially during any of the marriage negotiations. The title is found also in the rules of the reception of Princess Mary, written in French and drawn up by Frederick Henry. But unfortunately, for our curiosity, the document is not dated, and the last page is missing as if to obliterate any signature. Once Princess Mary was in Holland, it is evident that Frederick Henry lost no time in announcing that she should always be addressed Princess Royale. After her marriage, her brothers, who should have known better, addressed her as Princess of Orange, but never apparently addressed her as Princess Royale on the necessarily former covers of her letters. It may seem conclusive that the distinction thus originated in 1642 as the courtesy title improvised by a Dutchman, perhaps with some authority from Paris. The seeker of the closer documentation faces the chill reminder of an editor or calendar of Charles I's state papers that many were carried out by the government ministers themselves during Civil War from place to place till they finally perished, and the archives of the Royal House of Netherlands take us no further on this exacting point. Just want to look. Yeah, I think this is the Henrietta Marie that we're talking about. Okay, so I'll go ahead and keep reading. In the year 1660, the diarist John Evelyn occupied himself on making a fair copy of the earliest pages of his journal, and he described one passage thus: on the 27th of April, 1641, came over out at Holland the young Prince of Orange with a splendid equipage to make love to his Majesty's eldest daughter, now the Princess Royale. The original page was thus destroyed, but the final tag implies that Mary was not the Princess Royale in 1641, although the title indeed becomes hers in the now time of 1660. Closer still, a letter from Mary's husband dated the 24th of February, now in the archives of the Royal Dutch House, advised Amalia's nephew, the governor of Orange, that he should follow les ordres que la Princesse Royale. A year earlier, a Puritan newspaper writer and moderate intelligencer rumored that Princess Royale was receiving the superstitious sacrament. It was a false report, which at least reveals that the distinction had passed on to the common usage of the printed word. And certainly the style and title was in the orthodox. It was used in November 1646 when Prince William and Princess Mary set up their joint domicile. And from England, as if to return the compliment, William was appointed the Order of the Garter. Early the following year, the princess had set out through the Flanders mud to visit her mamma in Paris. Queen Henrietta had sought refuge in the French court from the Commonwealth turmoil in England, though not without risk from unfriendly ships in the Channel, and not without penning a charming letter to her husband. I'm giving you the strongest proof of love that I can give, hazarding my life that I may not incommode your affairs. Adieu, my dear heart. Princess Mary left The Hague with a procession of only 3 coaches and 1 maid of honor, With no need, she clearly considered to impress her young cousin, Louis of France. Sir John Conyers watched her effect on the boy monarch with amusement. The Princess Royal has been very well received. The king says he never saw a more handsome princess. Age 8, Louis XV had already understood that a king should speak in compliments. The date was 25 February 1647, and for the first time we may note that Princess Royale was mentioned by this title in British dispatches. As for the hat doffing, Prince Frederick Henry of Orange snatched off his nightcap on his deathbed when the princess returned home. Even in extremis, precedent came before tenderness. In her father-in-law's last days, in any event, the physicians feared for this reason, and the news that the Princess Royale might soon be having a baby, thus making him a grandfather of royalty, brought a sudden shock which caused him death. The prospect on which the old prince was so disastrously pinned his hopes ended in fact in miscarriage. On Mary's part, the frantic anxiety of events in England may well have hastened this disappointment, for after 5 years of civil war, she faced the desperate certainty that Cromwell had seized London, and she learned that her father, the king, was a prisoner at Carisbrooke Castle. Okay, we're on to section 5. So, Princess Mary and her Aunt Elizabeth were the best friends and closest neighbors of Hague. On a wet day, the Queen of Bohemia ordered her coach to pay a birthday visit to her niece. Not by land, but by water, as she wrote, for it rains if it were mad. Scarcely a week passed when they did not exchange family news in a companionship quickened by increasing anxiety. They each hurried to share even every message from England. When Elizabeth's two sons, Rupert and Maurice, had fought for the king for the raising of the royal standard at Nottingham until after the crushing defeat at Naseby. Mary's younger brother, 15-year-old James, was taken prisoner, and then he escaped disguised as a woman and reached safety in Holland. When the princess heard that he had landed, she could not suppress her excitement and ran down the street gates of the palace, flying across the cobbles so as to fling her arms about him. But then came the hideous shock of her father's execution. The groan that went up in Whitehall as the axe fell upon the neck of Charles I was echoed throughout Europe. The Queen of Bohemia wept and then fiercely told her household that if any English ambassadors, Cromwell's men, should call upon her, they were to be thrown downstairs and kicked into the streets. Mary shed her tears, but as a wife of the ruling Prince of Orange, she was upon more delicate diplomatic ground. Her brother, Charles, he was now Charles II, unproclaimed and recognized, and it gave her neither satisfaction nor ease in her grief to hear that a mob had surrounded the home of Cromwellian British agent, breaking his windows and shouting, "Long live King Charles and the Princess Royale!" Though James was safe, the fate of Charles indeed remained uncertain. He had just turned 20. He had briefly visited his sister in Holland and his mother in Paris, and then cheerfully put to sea to head an army in Scotland. His optimism appeared justified when, like all Scottish kings, he was actually crowned at Scone. Meanwhile, Princess Mary was confidently expecting a baby whom she hoped, after the early disappointment, might indeed be a lusty true child. As she and her young husband awaited the happy event, Prince William, he spent the time riding and hunting and playing spirited tennis with so little regard for November weather that he caught a chill from sweating too freely. On the afternoon of her niece's 19th birthday, the Queen of Bohemia received an urgent message to attend the princess. She wrote off a letter. Whether it be labor or not, I know not, but I must go to her. At the palace, she heard that the prince was suffering from an infection and he was kept in quarantine in his own apartments. Her niece was happy, but lethargic, deadly lazy, as her aunt put it, and not for the first time she urged her to exercise. Then suddenly the palace was stricken with terror, with murmurings and whisperings. Throughout the night and the next day, the doctors went and soft-footed up to the downstairs, and the princess had to be told of the dreadful certainty that her husband was dying. She had the presence of mind to go to her room before she broke into tears, and presently her aunt she had to be summoned to the palace yet again, but this time to help break the final irrevocable news of widowhood. All the women and nurses attendants on the princess donned full mourning, and the rooms where she awaited her lying were all hung with black draperies. The men who pinned up these ghastly trappings had scarcely put away their ladders before the baby was born. It was a new Prince of Orange. In a church decked with sable black 2 months later, when the baby was christened, the people of Netherlands were not slow to note that the Princess Royal had caused the baptismal robe to be trimmed with ermine. It was a touch of royal grandeur never before seen in Holland. It was a token, of course, of the infant Prince William's share of royal blood, and yet a portent to future events. In Whitehall Palace, 38 years later, he jointly accepted the crown of England with his wife and cousin, another Mary, the Princess Royale's niece, and so inaugurated the prosperous reign of William and Mary. So that is we're on to section 6. And that's a very interesting reign to read about if you want to read about it, whether you go search the internet or, read some British history books. It's a very interesting reign where James II, he went into exile. It's the baby in the bedchamber pot, because he actually his second wife gave birth to a male heir, and when Charles II died, he didn't have any heirs, so he kind of talked Parliament into accepting James II as his heir apparent. And they were all okay with it up until the point where his new wife had given birth to a male heir, and that's where the bedpot in the bedchamber theory came up with. I mean, he was a male heir, and his second wife was Catholic, and they were like not wanting to have another Catholic on the throne. So at any rate, the story ends up with James II going into exile and his whole family going into exile. And then James II's eldest daughter, Mary, was offered the acceptance of the crown, which she accepted as long as William, who was the military, he was the Prince of Orange, and he had a good, strong military skill set, and she took the throne. They worked very well together. She died early though, but they were a good consort. They had a good, prosperous reign. William always wanted to go to war, but at any rate, William and Mary became the co-consorts, and Mary was the eldest daughter of James II, and then it went to Queen Anne, which ended the Stuart reign. As we have noted, the previous duties of the Princess Royal have never been defined, and probably there are none, since the title implies that the holder is the first and the most royal of daughters, holding the rank above all others. Its modern bearer might be expected to carry out the foremost and most important of female regal tasks, other than those of the Queen. In Victorian days, the Queen's eldest daughter was thus valued by receiving a civil list annuity of 25 cents per higher than her sisters. It's a sum still faithfully remitted to Berlin after her marriage when she had been living in Germany for 25 years. In the financial assessment of the revised 1987 civil list, the Princess Royale at that time of writing receives £130,400, and it's curiously eclipsed by her cousin, Prince Alexandra, at £131,500 and almost equal to her aunt's. Princess Margaret received £127,000. The married Duke of York, however, receives only £50,000 plus his naval pay of £15,000, in contrast again with the Duke of Kent, who received £138,000. In the wonderland of royal finance, Anne is believed to be debited for her helicopter journeys and other travel expenses, but it is not charged for her working suite at the palace. These considerations bring us back to our first Princess Royale, Princess Mary of Stuart. When she found herself no longer the wife of the ruling Prince of Orange as his widow, she found herself styled Princess Royal as of right and fought furious battles for her precedence, but was often denied it. As a wife, she had sat at a table with her exiled brothers while her husband dined apart with lesser men, his government ministers, who could not be permitted to sit at the table with sons of a king. In her dark weeds and a cap as the window of the Prince of Orange, Mary, however, found herself relegated as one of the two dowager princesses of that little Dutch state. Her mother-in-law, decidedly her senior in age and experience, claimed the guardianship of her new infant prince, with the right to name the nurses and the tutors. Apart from youthful motherhood, Mary had her own claim to royal precedence to help in the battle for care of her child, although this was perhaps sufficient to erode and quell the self-confidence of the one-time Amalia Salma. After verbal battles, Mary emerged like a leading shareholder in a company, with 50% vote in making decisions in regard to her son, against the 25% vote of her mother-in-law, and the 25% vote accorded her brother-in-law, the Elector of Brandenburg. More than any other element of prestige, Mary had always defended her royal first footing, even to refusing to attend a wedding if there appeared a risk that a well-born German bride might take precedence over herself. After the Battle of Worcester, when her brother Charles II hid in Highgrove's oak trees before making his perilous way out of England, the Princess Royal was above all the first to uphold the family honor of the Stuart royalists. In Holland was the first of penniless exiles and fugitives, and the Princess Royal was the only Stuart to enjoy an assured income, for her annual dower of 100,000 florins, 11,000 pounds, nearly 3 times as much as Princess Amalia received. This sum was bolstered by gifts and bounties that had come from the rich commerce of Amsterdam in her husband's time. In contrast, her mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, while housed in the magnificence of the Louvre, was but the impoverished guest of Anne of Austria. and at times to stay in bed to keep warm. When they could not dine at courts, the princess's brothers in Paris were reduced to eating decidedly humble pie in cheap taverns. To regain her health and strength after the birth of her baby, Mary sawed wood for exercise, and gave logs away to help warm her brother's followers. My dear niece begins to mend in her looks and health, wrote Queen of Bohemia, since she saw billets every morning, and this dear Aunt Elizabeth in turn, though now a practiced royal in exile, also has stringent financial problems. With an ever-growing horde of refugees who look to her for substance, and with her own English allowance cut off, the former Queen of Bohemia sold her horses. She sold her pictures and much of her jewelry. We had nothing to eat but diamonds and pearls, wrote her daughter, and the saddest moment of bargaining came when she secretly pawned her wedding ring. Princess Mary helped her aunt through these desperate straits when they came to her ears, but the older women proudly kept her difficulties to herself. Fortunately, Dutch tradesmen equally regarded the Princess Royale as a surety for the mounting debts. But even the rich House of Orange was forced to recoup its royal charities by selling land. The Dutchman once said that Princess Royal's English relatives and their friends scented food like scavenging rats. The daughter of one of the Emerges, Pretty Anne Hyde, was given a post as maid-in-waiting to the princess. It was a kindness of great historical consequence when Mary's youngest brother, James, fell in love with Anne Hyde and secretly married her. That was James II's first wife, Anne Hyde, and they had two children, Mary and Anne, who became Queen Mary co-consort with William, and then Queen Mary, Queen Anne, and Queen Anne is known to have been friends with Sarah Churchill, and Queen Anne had a lot of pregnancies, even a couple of births, but she didn't really have any heirs that lived into adulthood. So when she died, the next heir was George I of Hanover in Germany. So anyway, yet youthful hunger was accompanied by youthful merriment. There still exists a spirited and delightful letter written by Charles to his aunt while freely enjoying Princess Royale's hospitality. He said, "I'm just now beginning this letter in my sister's chamber, where there's just a noise that I never hope to end it. We're thinking of dancing, in which we find two difficulties, the one for want of fiddlers, the other for somebody to teach the new dances. Certainly Aunt Elizabeth liked to see the young people happy and was sure that affairs would mend. The death of Cromwell aroused her hopes, but seemed at first to make no difference. Then suddenly there was a flurry of messengers back and forth across the North Sea. On one day, Charles urgently sent her for his sister and his aunt to see a trunk that had been brought to him that day by a deputation of 14 citizens from London. He flung open the lid with the air of conjure and revealed 50,000 gold coins. The king had been invited to return home at last, and this was a liberal payment for advance expenses. Okay, we're on to one of the last sections. In all the long British history, there was never more rejoicing than when the monarchy was restored after the 11 years of republicanism under Cromwell. On May Day in London, bells rang, bonfires blazed, and they went on their knees in streets to drink to the health of the coming king. And in Parliament, men swept for joy as they carried in the vote for the new constitution. All this had an intense emotional effect on Princess Mary. At a distance from the joyous tumult in England and yet at the heart of the royal family, in her palace at Hague, Charles received visitors hour by hour. At the wish of the government of the States of Holland, the royal family dined in public each day, watched, that is, by everyone of sufficient rank to secure the entree. A band played through the endless courses, toasts were drunk with tears of joy, and from time to time, old friends knelt to the king for the accolade of knighthood. By night, Mary could scarcely sleep for excitement, and through the crowded days, her son was constantly at her side, watching the processions, now a pageant of decorated tableaux staged in one city, now a great military parade held in another. It made the boy shout with excitement. Young William was now also recognized in the English succession, and among those who crowded in to see the Princess Royal and kiss her hand was Samuel Pepys, counting himself glad and fortunate to be among those commanded to escort the king safely to his home in England. The emotion grew insupportable. Long before dawn on the day Charles was to sail, 50,000 people lined the dikes to watch the royal departure. Riding out to the ship were her nephew, sharing the unbelievable dream. The Queen of Bohemia heard a great shout when he went abroad. All jolly English tars cried out, "We have him! We have him! God bless King Charles!" she noted jubilantly. Before sailing, all the royal family dined together, which Pepys thought a blessed sight to see. The Princess Royal was to visit England as soon as possible, yet, at their leave-taking under the pressure of such intense emotions, brother and sisters wept. The prince indeed delayed her journey for 4 months, and so did not witness the indescribable scene when Charles rode into London. A slim, dark young man riding bareheaded through the clamoring thousands, while girls threw flowers from balconies and windows, and the roar of the crowds drowned the tumultuous bells and the thunder of the saluting guns. In her garden at Marta House, Mary watched her son playing tennis, unable to rid herself of a premonition that if she too went to England, she would never see him again. Her aunt vainly tried to reassure her that no harm would befall such a strong, healthy lad. By September, the intricate arrangements for the Princess Royal's visit were complete. The admiralship awaited her with an escort of 7 warships, and she could procrastinate no more. A great concourse of persons, officials of all kinds, came to see her off. She had hardly stepped on board when a man ran up the gangway, and the princess knew from the looks of consternation that he was clearly the bearer of bad tidings. Her heart must have stood still, but her son was safe. The news had to be broken that her youngest brother, Henry, had died in England of smallpox. It seemed in keeping with this gloomy leave-taking that the voyage was hazardous. Her ship was running onto the Goodwin Sands no less than 6 times, with such crashing and creaking that all on board feared for their lives. The king and his brother, James, the Duke of York, set out down a river from London in the state barge to meet the princess, but her convoy was so late in reaching Margate that the king had a mind to return to London. And then at last her little fleet was sighted. It was 18 years since Princess Mary had seen England, and she landed with a company of 100 persons, but feeling alien alone. The spectacle a day later, when the gilded barges were rowed upstream, the guns of the tower booming in salute, all the bells ringing, was intended to echo the king's own homecoming. Hundreds of small crafts sailed out in welcome. But the assembled multitude saw very little of the Princess Royale. Pepys was unimpressed. The following Sunday, on seeing her in Whitehall Chapel, it seemed more urgent to note that the king had laughed all the ill-sung anthem. In Holland, as Princess Royale, Mary had nobly upheld the dignity and honor of the monarchy. But in the brilliance of the Restoration, she seemed bewildered and out of her depth, with none of the dazzling charm, civility, and common sense tact that endowed her brother with such instant distinction. Parliament voted her to have £10,000 a year, and for that she hid behind the curtains of her own coach. Perhaps she could not fling off her fears for her son, so implicit in her depressing mood of foreboding. The king took her to the cockpit playhouse, and evidently she looked so bored at some British music, as Pepys observed, that the king bade them stop and make French music. The public was agog to see the king's sister, but she dined in public within the precincts of Whitehall Palace only once. The common people indeed saw her but once in 8 weeks, when she left the palace one morning to revisit the scenes of her childhood at Hampton Court. A boat prepared for her on the river was hung and cushioned curiously with black, and her horse trappings were similarly of melancholy black velvet and silver lace. The king could not stop laughing and gay, and the princess's appearance thoroughly rebuked him for not mourning more for their youngest brother. When the November fog swirled around Whitehall, she completely withdrew to her own suite of apartments. It's an eccentricity so contrasts in the gaiety of the court that the town was filled with surmise and gossip. On the 21st of December, Pepys recorded 2 rumors. One was that Princess Royale had married a young equerry named Henry Jermyn, master of the horse to the Duke of York. The other was that she was dangerously ill. Only the latter story was correct. Mary indeed never saw her son again, for the physicians diagnosed smallpox, which may have well been measles. They bled her too much and too often. She died on Christmas Eve. In the registers at Westminster Abbey on 29 December 1660 is the entry of the burial of Princess Mary Royale, the king's eldest daughter, mother to the Prince of Orange. And only 2 months later, in writing to the Queen of Bohemia, the Earl of Craven had to confide what was no more than a bitter truth. The Princess Royale is much forgotten here, as she had never been. It was left only to Aunt Elizabeth to visit London in the summer of 1661, the coronation being well passed with great gallantry, as she wrote in a characteristic letter. It was as if designed by Providence to tell us of these events. Samuel Pepys saw her at the opera. "We stayed a very great while for the king and the Queen of Bohemia," he says. "She very literally brought the house down. So many people crowding to see the almost legendary Queen of Hearts that part of the balcony collapsed, showering the ladies and gentlemen below with dust, which made for good sport," as Pepys wrote in high spirits. In her new gown, she sparkled in company, making every attempt to see and be seen, writing to her daughters for news of the latest fashions which she might contribute to the brightest of London. After the Princess Royal dismal and unimpressive appearance at public scene, the cold truth glimmered. Even amid the luster of the Restoration, and the dismal royalty added nothing to the strength and popularity of the throne. Queen Elizabeth of Bohemia had precisely the magical charm and gift of winning affection that we recognize in Queen Elizabeth with the Queen Mother. Oh, this is Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Yeah, the Queen Mother, Queen Elizabeth, she was very charming. As Genesis Ambassador reported of her in the days of radiant popularity that crowned her life, she is restored to some authority and thus heightened the luster of that affable manner which she wonderfully conciliates the esteem and love of the courts. So we are on to the last section. This is the long section, the Stuart section. This is only a couple of pages, so I'm just going to read it. For more than 60 years, the style of Princess Royal lapsed from usage and was all but lost in oblivion. King Charles II left no legitimate descendants, though he dearly loved his daughter by Lady Castlemaine. My dear Charlotte, be assured that I love you with all my heart, being your kind father, he would write. She married the Earl of Lichfield, the most beautiful bride and a most constant wife. As her monument testifies, and would have made a model princess. From Charles, the throne passed to his brother James II, and so James's two daughters, James's two daughters by Anne Hyde, whom he wedded in secret, but was a valid midnight ceremony in Whitehall Chapel. Mary was married to Prince William of Orange, that self-same prince, the son of Mary, Princess Royal, whom we have seen wrapped in royal ermine for his christening. In royal alliance, the Oranges were as persistent a present day as the Mountbattens. Unassuming and warm-hearted, Mary was Prince of Orange for 7 years before her father ascended the throne at Westminster, and the possibility that she might also be dubbed Princess Royal was never considered. Her husband desired his pages to kneel to her, but the only occasion when Mary had insisted on her right of precedence had been a mischievous, youthful escapade at The Hague when she ordered her coach to drive against the stream of traffic on the fashionable Voorhout. It was strictly her prerogative. The flamboyant carriage of the wife of the Danish ambassador refused to give way and was crushed in a full-tilt collision, a victory over florid ostination that endeared the princess all the more to her unpretentious people. If her father had shown a fraction of warmth and humor, he might have held his throne. Instead, James had fled. Parliament invited William and Mary to reign over Britain in joint partnership, and taking his wife's hand, Prince William accepted for both of them. The couple were, however, childless. 13 years later, Mary's sister Anne next became the monarch. Of all her 17 children, only one survived infancy, and he was poor and frail, and he did not live to see her crowned. The Protestant succession then passed on to George I, the Elector of Hanover. He was the grandson, through her youngest daughter Sophia, of the Queen Elizabeth of Bohemia, who had understood the duties and difficulties of royalty so well. George I was appropriately born in the year of the Restoration, which so delightfully delighted his grandmother. He was 1/4 Stuart blood, but German otherwise by birth and nature. It should have overstressed the Germanic atmosphere of his court of St. James if his eldest daughter, Queen Prussia by marriage, had also become Princess Royal of England. But it was a title that was not then revived. George I reigned for 13 years, and in June 1727, his son succeeded the throne as George II. He was schooled in his royal responsibilities and prerogatives by Sir Robert Walpole. The second George appreciated the quirks of the British character. Moreover, he became almost English by adoption of himself after years of living in London. He also had 5 daughters by his wife Caroline at Vansback, and considered a clear asset to the monarchy to have a string of cultivated princesses of St. James. On his father's coronation, he had been adorned by pretty girls, but George II desired his own crowning not to lack such a pleasing and decorative feature. 10 weeks after his accession, he scrawled his signature across a royal warrant dated 30 August 1727, conferring armorial bearings upon our eldest daughter, the Princess Royal Anne. Thus, we can see the distinction officially established for the first time. It was a notable addition to the pomp and panoply around the crown. And that is the end of the Stuart princesses. And I am going to read the next section of George II's daughter, Princess Anne, the Princess Royale. So